7-Day Magic by Edward Eager. Illustrated by N.M. Bodecker. Copyright 1962. Chapter 1. Finding It. "The best kind of book," said Barnaby, "is a magic book." "Naturally," said John. There was a silence, as they all thought about this and how true it was. "The best kind of magic book," said Barnaby, leaning back against the edge of the long, low library table and surveying the crowded bookshelves, only seeming somehow to look beyond them and beyond everything else, too, the way he so often did. "Is when it's about ordinary people like us, and then something happens and it's magic. Like when you find a nickel, except it isn't a nickel, it's a half-magic talisman," said Susan. "Or you're playing in the front yard and somebody asks, 'Is this the road to Butterfield?'" said Abby. "Only it isn't at all. It's the road to Oz," shrilled Frederica, jiggling up and down excitedly, for she had read the book in which this happens. The lady sitting at the far end of the table sighed and looked up, putting her hand to her head as if it ached. "Please," she said, "can't we have quiet?" Now, said Miss Dowager, the librarian, wagged a finger in merry reproof as she skimmed past. Now. This is a children's room, you know. It's for the children to enjoy." The lady sighed again, closed the book she was reading, and opened another. Abby tried to catch her eye and look sympathetic, but the lady would not meet her gaze. Abby knew the lady well by sight. She was called Miss Prang, Miss Eulalie Smythe Prang, and she spent most of her days in the children's room at the library, looking in the different books and taking things out. When she had taken enough out, she put it together into a new book. There were a lot of her books on the library shelves already, but they were not the kind of magic books Barnaby and John and Susan and Abby and Frederica had in mind. Mostly they were about dear little fairies who lived in buttercups. Abby sometimes thought that if Miss Prang would listen when she heard children talking, instead of sighing and putting her hand to her head, it might do her books a lot of good. For instance, she ought to be listening to Barnaby right now. "The best kind of magic book," Barnaby was saying, "is the kind where the magic has rules, and you have to deal with it and thwart it before it thwarts you. Only sometimes you forget and get thwarted." Everybody began talking at the same time, and the name of E. Nesbit was heard in more than one voice, for she was the 5 children's favorite author, and no wonder, though Frederica liked the Oz books nearly as well. "Why couldn't she have lived forever?" said Abby, taking that best of all Nesbit books, The Enchanted Castle, down from the shelf and looking at it with loving eyes. "We've read all of hers, and nobody seems to do books like that anymore." "If you could have a brand new magic book, specially made for you," said John, "what would you choose?" "One about a lot of children," said Abby. "One about 5 children just like us," said Frederica. "And they're walking home from somewhere, and the magic starts suddenly before they know it," said Susan. "And they have to learn its rules and tame it and make the most of it," said Barnaby. At the far end of the table, Miss Prang muttered to herself, pushed the books about in front of her, and at last half rose to her feet, gazing imploringly in the direction of the librarian's desk. Miss Dowager came skimming across the room again. "I think then, children, if you're ready to go," she murmured apologetically, "perhaps it would be best. Have you found enough books to take?" Of course they had not, for who has ever found enough books? But they scrabbled together the ones they had chosen and lined up at the desk to have the date stamped in them. It was then that Susan looked back and saw the book sitting all by itself at one end of the bottom shelf. It was a red book, smallish but plump, comfortable and shabby. There had once been gilt letters on the back, but these had been rubbed away, and Susan couldn't read the name of what it was. Still, it looked odd enough to be interesting and worn enough to have been enjoyed by countless generations. On a sudden impulse, she added it to the pile in her arms and took her place at the end of the line. She thought Miss Dowager looked at her a bit strangely when she saw the red book. But "That's a 7-day book," was all she said. Susan was surprised. Usually the books that had to be returned in 7 days were the newest ones, and new was the last thing she would have thought this book to be. "Oh, we'll be through with it before that," she said. I wouldn't be too sure, remarked Miss Dowager, in rather a peculiar voice, Susan thought. But she stamped the book with a will, and a minute later Susan and the others emerged from the library into the bright, new-washed June morning. If you had seen the 5 children coming down the library steps that day, you would have thought they belonged to 2 families, and this was true. John and Susan were tall and light-haired and calm. Barnaby and Abby and Frederica were little and quick and dark. "You 2 look just the way you are," Barnaby had said one day, back when the 2 families had first met. "You look worthy and dependable. You look like people who would be president and vice president of the class." "Well," admitted Susan apologetically, "we usually are." She and John were president and vice president of the 5th grade this year. They were in the same class, not because they were twins, which they weren't, but because John had been very sick once and missed a whole year of school. But that was long ago. Now John was big and strong and played quarterback on the school football team. Susan was captain of girls' soccer, and they were both rather good at chess. In schoolwork, their marks generally averaged B, or at least B-. Almost everybody liked them, even teachers, and their days were pleasant, if uneventful. Or at least that was the way things had always been up until last summer. But then last summer, Barnaby moved into the house across the road and turned out to be in their room in school, and after that things were changed. Barnaby was a person with ideas. "I don't see what you see in that little runt," Big Pete Schroeder said to John at football practice one day back in the fall, when Barnaby was still the new boy in Miss Dugdale's room. "I don't see why you want to go around with him all the time for." "It's like this," John told him. "He has ideas, and he's my best friend, so lay off." Big Pete Schroeder laid off, because John's word was law in 5-1A. The only one who could tell John what to do was Barnaby. Barnaby had ideas. The ideas Barnaby had weren't always good ones, but he had them one after another all day long, and some of them were exciting. He believed that anything could happen any minute, and that sometimes you could make things happen if you tried hard enough. And he could think of wonderful games and ways to make the most boring things seem fun. Nobody would ever have taken Barnaby for the president of anything. He was not dignified enough, and everybody did not like him as much as John and Susan did. He was stubborn and hot-tempered and impatient, and when he disagreed with people, he started arguments. Miss Dugdale said the trouble with Barnaby was he was opinionated. Susan sometimes tried to reason with Barnaby for his own good, and other times John had to step in and defend him when he got into fights with boys who were bigger than he was. That was one thing about Barnaby. Even his enemies agreed. He had spunk. He wasn't afraid of anybody. But he wasn't really at his best with his fists. He was more of a brain. It was typical of him, Susan and John felt, to have an interesting and unusual name, and to have sisters with interesting names too, Abigail and Frederica. "Our names sound just like us," Susan complained one day after Barnaby had come into their lives. "Good old Susan and John," agreed John. Barnaby liked his own name. He was proud of its differentness and would never answer to Barney or any other nickname. And Frederica was just the same. People took their lives in their hands who dared to call her Freddie. Frederica was the baby of the family and even fiercer tempered than Barnaby. But everybody called Abigail Abby. Abby was that kind of person, just jolly and friendly, with no temper at all. Barnaby always said Abby must be a throwback, only he couldn't decide what she was a throwback to. She wasn't a bit like the rest of the family. "That's 'cause she's the middle one," said Barnaby's father, overhearing this one afternoon. "Middle ones are mild. Only don't count on it. She may surprise you someday." He ruffled Abby's hair, and Abby gave him a loving look. Barnaby and Abby and Frederica's father was a nice man. He was a singer on television, but not yet a famous one. Mostly you saw him as one of a quartet singing that his beer was fine gold, the dry beer, or wanting someone to be sociable and have a poopsie. He was little and quick and dark like Barnaby, and when he was at home playing croquet or badminton with the kids, he looked more like their brother than their father. But he wasn't home so very often, because with 3 children to support, he had to go into New York at all kinds of hours, on all kinds of different singing jobs. Barnaby's mother used to be a dancer, but now she went whizzing around all day in her old car, trying to sell other people's houses to help make ends meet and keep up their payments on their own house. Their house was new and little, just large enough to hold a family of 5. Susan and John's house across the road was big and old. Sometimes Susan thought it was too big for just her and John and Granny. Susan and John's parents had died a long time ago, the same year John was so sick. After that, Granny came to stay with them, but whether she was taking care of them or they were taking care of her was never quite clear. Susan and John often felt as if Granny were the child and they were the grown-ups. Granny was like that. She was little and frail and older than most grandmothers and yet almost too energetic. And she was so unexpected in what she might do and often did, such as climbing cherry trees or shoveling snow off the walk, that Susan and John hated to leave her alone in the house any more than they had to. Sometimes one of them would miss a party sooner than have both of them go out for a whole evening at the same time. Not that Granny would have climbed trees or shoveled snow in the dark of night, but she would probably think of something just as dangerous and unsuitable. So altogether, it was wonderful for Susan and John when Barnaby moved into the little new house, and they had a friend right at home, almost in the front yard. And then to have the friend turn out to be a person with ideas was almost too good to be true. One of the ideas Barnaby had was that Susan and John should get acquainted with the public library. Up till then, John hardly read anything at all outside of school, and Susan mostly read about Sue Barton, student nurse. But books were Barnaby's lifeblood, maybe because he was an author himself. He had a book of his own in his mind, and some of it down on paper, but he would never talk about it or tell the others what it was, except that he had told a little of it to Abby, for she was a poet, or hoped to be, and would understand. Most of the time when Barnaby wasn't having ideas or thinking about his own book, he was reading other people's. He read one a day, at least, and was anxious that his friends should do the same. It was Barnaby who had decided that Saturday was library day. Each Saturday morning, as soon as breakfast was over, the 5 children would ride along with Barnaby's mother on her way to the office, and with Barnaby's father, too, if he were catching the train for an early rehearsal, and get off at the library corner. Later, after an hour or two of rummaging and browsing, and a lot of advice from Barnaby, they would come down the library steps and walk along the village street that turned into the curving country road home, reading as they went. And Barnaby had made a game of that, too. Each one got to read a part of his most interesting-looking book out loud, and then the others were free to criticize. This particular June morning started out no differently from the others. As the 5 children wandered along Cherry Street, Barnaby opened his top book hopefully and began Chapter 1. But only after a paragraph or two, he leafed over to the back, glanced at the pages, and shut the cover with a disgusted bang. "I thought so," he said. "Of all the gyps! It calls itself the Magic Door, but there's not a speck of real magic in it anywhere. It's just about this boy that learns to get along with these other people by being friendly and stuff. And the Magic Door's just the door of good fellowship or something. Man, do I despise a book like that." And the others could not have agreed with him more. Usually the 5 children could spot a book like that a mile off, though. It wasn't very often that they got fooled. So then, of course, Frederica had to read about Ozma's birthday party from the end of The Road to Oz, the way she almost always did. The others never minded listening to this once again. It took them back to their own happy, carefree, innocent childhood. When she had finished, Barnaby looked around at the others. Anybody else? Ordinarily, Susan would have been the last to answer. She wasn't a quick reader out loud and was afraid of disgracing herself in Barnaby's hearing by stumbling over long words. But today she looked at the little old shabby-looking book on the top of her pile, and something made her change her mind. "I've got this book here," she said. "What is it?" said Barnaby. "Who's it by?" "I don't know," said Susan. "It doesn't seem to say. I just kind of think it might be interesting." And she opened the worn red cover and began to read. These are the words that Susan read. "The best kind of book," said Barnaby, "is a magic book." "Naturally," said John. "The best kind of book," said Barnaby, leaning back against the edge of the long, low library table and surveying the crowded bookshelves, only seeming somehow to look beyond them and beyond everything else, too, the way he so often did, "is when it's about ordinary people like us, and then something happens and it's magic. Like when you find a nickel, except it isn't a nickel, it's a half-magic talisman, said Susan. Or when you're playing in the front yard, and somebody asks, is this the road to Butterfield, said Abby. Only it isn't at all. It's the road to Oz, shrilled Frederica, jiggling up and down excitedly. Susan's voice trailed off. She looked at the others. It can't be, said Barnaby. It is, said Susan. It's about us. All of us, and every single thing we said. Let's see. Barnaby reached for the book. Rather greedily, Susan thought, and yet what of it? This was no time to be worrying about manners, and Barnaby could read the fastest. He was reading fast now, flipping over the pages one after the other. You're right, he muttered as he read. We're all in it. How could we be? Said John. How did we get there without our knowing it? I don't know, said Barnaby. But we're there all right. It tells about us and our parents and your granny even. And a lot more about me being stubborn and unpopular and you sticking up for me, he went on, his face getting rather red. What does it say about me? Said Frederica. It says you're fierce-tempered, said Barnaby. Well, I am, said Frederica. There was a silence. Everybody stopped walking and just stood there. What's happening? Said Abby. Do you suppose we're magic suddenly? Either we are, said John, or that book is. Maybe it isn't a book at all, said Frederica in eerie tones. I don't like it, said Abby. It's creepy. Let's take it back and tell the library we don't want it. Or bury it with a stake through its heart, said Barnaby. But nobody laughed. Do you suppose, said Susan, we're not really real at all, but just characters in this book somebody wrote? This was a sobering thought. I don't want to be not real, said Frederica, all of a sudden not seeming fierce-tempered at all, but just little and scared. There was another silence. Everybody looked at Barnaby. Barnaby thought a minute. Then he shook his head. No, he said, it can't be that. Because when the book tells about me and Abby and Frederica, it says we've just moved here. But I remember being me long before that. Maybe that part of you was in another book, said Susan. She didn't mean to say it, but it just slipped out. Barnaby was undaunted. All right, he said. Suppose we are book characters. It never bothered us before we thought about it. It doesn't have to bother us now. Characters have all kinds of interesting things happen to them. And here's a whole book full of adventures, and we're just at the beginning. What happens next? Said Frederica, standing on tiptoe and trying to see over Barnaby's shoulder, only she was too little to reach. What happens at the end? Said Abby. That's what I'm worrying about. How far did you get? Said Susan. Did the Susan in the book find an old book in the library too, and start reading out loud from it? That's where I stopped, said Barnaby. Susan opened the worn red cover and began to read. It says, Just think, John said dreamily. If we find a book about people like us, and the people in the book find a book about people like them, and the people in that book find a book about people like... Don't, cried Susan. It's like those awful arithmetic problems that go on and on. She turned back to Barnaby. Then what does the book say? Is it taking down everything we're saying now like a stenographer? No, said Barnaby. It doesn't say anything then. The page ends there. Turn over, said Frederica. Look in the back, said Abby. Barnaby tried. I can't, he told them. It's stuck or something. The whole rest of the book's shut solid tight. I suppose that's as much as they want us to know, said Abby darkly. And now I suppose the awful thing happens. What awful thing? Said Frederica. I don't know. Some awful thing. It stands to reason. Not necessarily, said Barnaby. And then even he broke off and caught his breath and looked around warily. But what happened was nothing at all, except that the sun went on shining and the sky went on being blue, and some cars drove by, and an oriole sang, and a woman came out of a house and began beating a carpet. After a few minutes of this usualness, everyone found himself breathing more regularly again. The 5 children found themselves walking along again too, and waiting for Barnaby to begin having more ideas. And pretty soon he did. Of course, he said, I'm beginning to see it all. Don't you remember? We said we wanted a special magic book of our own. About 5 children just like us, said Abby. You said that part. and she pointed an accusing finger at Frederica. No matter who said what, said Barnaby. It looks as if we got it somehow. But something had to make the wish come true. And what else but the book itself could have done that? He turned to Susan. Where'd you find it in the first place? On the bottom shelf of the fairy tale section, she said, remembering. Barnaby nodded excitedly. It all adds up. Think of it sitting there all those years with the magic from all those other books dripping down onto it. It's probably soaked with magic powers by now. It's probably been sitting there waiting for somebody to come along and make a wish in front of it. And we came and wanted a magic story. So that's what it turned into. Probably if we'd wanted pirates, it'd turn into a book about a pirate ship with us on board. But we asked for magic, so that's what we got. What kind of wish is that? Said Frederica. What good is a book about us? We know about us. We don't know what's coming next, said Barnaby. All we've had is the beginning. What else did we wish for? Think back. I said the people in the book would be walking home from somewhere and the magic would start suddenly before they knew it, said Susan. Well, said Barnaby, that part came true. And then I said they'd have to tame the magic and learn its rules and thwart it and make the most of it. So I guess it's up to us to do that from now on. Barnaby was certainly having ideas today. In fact, he was having them so fast that the others could hardly keep up with him. But they were exciting ideas all the same. You mean, said Susan, there's a whole book still going to happen to us? That's what I think, said Barnaby. But if it's all there in the book, said John, why not use the magic and wish the book open? So we can read the next chapter and know what to expect. I don't think it works like that, said Barnaby. I think that'd be against the rules. Anyway, maybe it isn't any next chapter yet. I think if we could pry open the rest of the pages, they'd probably be blank. I think it'd probably be up to us to make more wishes and have them come true so as to fill the pages up. Sort of make up the book as we go along, said Abby. You mean it's ours to use, said Susan, like a wishing ring, sort of? Only mixed up with those things they have in offices, said Frederica. Those things you talk into. Dictaphones, said John. Whatever they're called, said Frederica. That's the idea, Barnaby said. More or less. Everyone thought about this. That book, said John, had better be handled with care from now on. Don't anybody dare even think about wishing, said Susan, till we've talked it out and decided what kind of adventure we want. You ought to do the deciding, said Barnaby. You're the one who found the book in the first place. That was typical of Barnaby. He might be grabby, but he was fair. Susan's hand went out toward the book. Then she pulled it back and shook her head. Barnaby was the one with ideas. Let him go on having them. No, you go first. You'll do it better. No, you ought to be the one. No, honestly, I'd rather... Oh, for heaven's sake, said Frederica. If everybody else is too polite around here, let me. And she laid hold of the book. Stop her, somebody, cried Abby. But it was too late. Frederica was already talking, gabbling her words without stopping to breathe for fear someone would interrupt her, the way youngest children in families soon learn to do. I wish we'd have a magic adventure with wizards and witches and magic things in it, and I wish it'd start right now, this minute, so we'd know for certain it's really our wish coming true and not just a coincidence. That's done it, said Barnaby, when Frederica finally stopped just before utter breath failed. But it didn't seem to have. Nothing happened. Maybe the book didn't hear her, said Abby. Maybe I'm supposed to kiss it or something, said Frederica. Maybe we're supposed to keep on walking, said Barnaby. The minute isn't up yet. They kept on walking. Round a bend in the road, they came on a house they had always specially noticed in the past. It was a perfectly ordinary-looking house and a perfectly ordinary-looking garden, but it had an interesting sign by the driveway. Slow, warned the sign. Cats, etc. In the past, the 5 children had often stopped and waited by the driveway in hope that something other than a cat would come out. But up till this second, nothing had. At this second, which happened to be the 59th since Frederica had made her wish, something did. What came out was a dragon. Chapter 2. Using It. The dragon was bright red all over, except for its eyes, which were green. It was flying low over the driveway, puffing purple smoke as it came. Abby stopped short and clutched the others, but Frederica pressed forward curiously, and the dragon seemed just as curious as Frederica. It hovered over her in hawk-like circles, peering down. For a moment their eyes met. Then it scooped her up in its scaly grasp and flew away with her over the trees. "Stop!" cried John, starting to run in the direction it had taken. "Do something!" cried Abby, pulling at Barnaby. "Use the book! Wish!" She turned to Susan. "Wait," said Barnaby. He was as pale as the others, but he was having ideas all the same. "You'll never find it that way," he called to John. "It's probably over to some other country by now." John stopped running, for indeed the dragon and Frederica had disappeared in the far distance, and the last puff of purple smoke was merging into the clouds. "And let's not make any more wishes without stopping to think," Barnaby went on. "Frederica did that, and look what happened. But she asked for a magic adventure, and this is it. I think we ought to start by finding out whose dragon it is." "Look," Susan said, pointing up the driveway. A ground floor window of the house was open, and a face was staring out at the 4 children. The face wore a surprised expression. Abby, usually so timid, ran right across the lawn and up to the face, and the others followed. "Was that your dragon?" she demanded sternly. "Oh dear," said the face. "Is that what that was? I was afraid that's what it was." "Well, you ought to be more careful," Abby scolded. "You let it get away, and now it's stolen my little sister." "Oh dear," said the face again. "I am sorry." Now that they were near, the 4 children could see that the face belonged to a little round gentleman with a bald head. He wore an old-fashioned long coat, a fancy vest, and a flowing tie. In his hand was a tall silk hat, which he was regarding in a distracted manner. "I don't know what could have gone wrong," he went on. "Just such a thing has never happened before. I was practicing my tricks the way I always do after breakfast, and I reached into my hat to pull out a rabbit, and something came out, only it was something else." "It certainly was," said John. "I could tell it wasn't a rabbit," said the round gentleman, "from the feel, but I didn't dare to look. Then it went whoosh, and it was gone." Barnaby turned to the others. "You can see what probably happened. Frederica probably made her wish at the exact minute, and that probably did it." The round gentleman did not appear to have heard this. "I'm sorry to have inconvenienced any sister of yours," he went on. "Still, it shows I haven't lost my neck, doesn't it?" Barnaby looked at him, and he remembered the rest of Frederica's wish. "You must be a wizard," he said. The round gentleman looked pleased. "How did you guess? It is true that is my profession, though magician is the proper term. In vaudeville they called me the Great Oswaldo." "What's vaudeville?" whispered Abby to Barnaby. "It's a kind of show they used to have, back before television," he whispered back. "Oh," said Abby. She had thought vaudeville might be a magic kingdom, rather like Oz or Narnia. Still, at a time like this, even a stage wizard was probably better than no wizard at all. And the round gentleman appeared kind. So she said, "You'll help us, won't you? You'll find my sister for us?" The round gentleman looked uncertain. "Well, I'll try," he said. "Won't you come in?" And he left the window. "Shall we?" said Susan. "Proceed as the door opens," said Barnaby. But when the round gentleman opened the door of the house, the 4 children hesitated. The hall inside looked dark and spooky, and there were sounds, a furry flumping and a patting and a purring and a murmur of mews. "Better not. He's got more wild beasts," warned John. "Merely a few household pets," said the round gentleman. "When I retired, I thought a cat would be company, but they mounted up," and he switched on the hall light. The 4 children regarded the scene with interest. Cats wreathed around the round gentleman's feet, and the bottoms of his trousers were patterned with their paw prints. And the children knew now what the etc. on the sign had stood for. The etc. was kittens. They sat on the stair and stared through the banisters and played on the plate rail. "Aw," said Abby, running to pick up the smallest and fluffiest kitten and hold it against her, and the other 3 followed her into the hall. As they did so, a woman appeared from the back of the house. "Who are all these?" she said. "Feed on my good rugs, as if them cats weren't enough." "It's all right, Mrs. Funkhauser," said the round gentleman. "These visitors are for me. Mrs. Funkhauser is my landlady," he went on when the woman had muttered herself away. "A good woman, but not much artistic temperament. And now if you'll step this way." He went through a door at the end of the hall, and the 4 children followed. When they saw the room beyond the door, Abby's eyes grew wide with wonder, and John said, "Whew!" The room looked very much as yours does when you have played with your Misto magic set and forgotten to pick it up, and then the cat has got in. Only in this case it was more like 20 magic sets and 30 cats. Crystal balls and bottles of colored liquid and jars of colored powder and phials and retorts and spirit lamps were on every table and shelf. But most of the bottles were tipped over and most of the powder was spilled. Cats and kittens moved among the remains. "I'm afraid we're a little untidy this morning," said the round gentleman. I don't know what Mrs. Funkhauser would say. The poor children thought they knew what she would say all too well. "However," the gentleman went on, looking at the litter of paraphernalia and fluttering his hands in a rather helpless way, "we'll see what we can do. I'm afraid I may be a bit rusty. It's years now since my farewell appearance, and I never found a lost girl, even in the old days. I'm not quite certain how it's done. I used to saw a lady in half at one time, but it's not quite the same thing." "It certainly isn't," said Susan indignantly. "I might try the hat trick again and see what comes out this time," suggested the round gentleman. But when he put his hand in the hat, what came out wasn't Frederica or even a white rabbit. What came out was the smallest kitten, who had left Abby's shoulder and crawled into the hat when no one was looking. "Sorry," said the gentleman. "I suppose it would be more to the point to get the dragon back into the hat, wouldn't it? Or transform him to some more harmless form. Where's my box of tricks?" He found a card index and rifled through it. "Transformations," he muttered. "There's only one listed here, but as I remember it was always colorful." He found a blue handkerchief in the litter on the nearest table and drew it through a wooden ring. The handkerchief was transformed from blue to red, but Frederica did not return. And if the dragon, wherever it was by now, was altered in any way, it did not put in an appearance to make the fact known. "You're not trying," said Abby accusingly. She was beginning to suspect that the round gentleman might be a good wizard without being very good at it. "Yes, I am," said the round gentleman. "The third time's always the one that works." His eyes roamed the room, rather desperately, Susan thought. "There's this," he said, picking up a bottle of purple liquid, seemingly at random. "What does it do?" said John. "It's supposed to make a red flare," said the round gentleman. "But the way things have been going this morning, anything might happen." And he emptied the bottle into a bowl. As he did so, Susan had an idea. She wasn't sure yet just how the magic of the book worked. It had already proved it could get them into adventures, but after that, did it just sit back and watch, or would it help? Who could say? Still, there was no harm in trying, and she felt sorry for the round gentleman and wanted to help him, to say nothing of Frederica. So she held the book firmly in both hands and wished with all her might that this time the magic would prove successful. The round gentleman struck a match and lit the fluid in the bowl. It made a red flare all right, but other things happened too. There was a whooshing noise followed by a whirring one. "It wasn't supposed to do that," said the round gentleman. "Or that either," he added as there was a sudden jolt, and everybody's stomach felt the way yours does when you're in an elevator and it starts going up too fast. "We're moving," said Barnaby. "Flying, I think." John ran to the window. "That's right. We're off the ground. We're headed the same way the dragon did, too." 2 treetops passed by the window, going from left to right, just to prove it. "Oh, dear," said the round gentleman, turning pale. "What will Mrs. Funkhauser say? She always claims she runs a well-run house, but I don't think she'd want it to fly." What Mrs. Funkhauser would say was soon made clear. "Mr. Oswaldo," she said, appearing sternly in the doorway, "you put this house down right this minute." The round gentleman shook his head. "I would if I could," he said, "but I can't. I don't know how." "This," said Mrs. Funkhauser, "is the last straw. Mama always said never rent to theatricals or they'd raise the roof. If we ever get back to Lower Weed Street, your room will be wanted." "I'm sorry," said the round gentleman, but he didn't look sorry. He was smiling. "Still, it's a good trick, isn't it? I didn't know I had it in me." Susan said nothing, but she gave the book a grateful pat. Barnaby saw her do it. Their eyes met, and he seemed to put 2 and 2 together. He nodded to himself. Then he turned to the round gentleman. "You keep it up," he said kindly. "You're doing fine." When the dragon first flew away with Frederica, she thought her last hour had come. But as the minutes went by and it didn't actually bite, her hopes rose. Dragon stories in books sometimes had happy endings. Maybe a prince would come rescue her, or maybe Barnaby would. By the time she dared to look down, the landscape beneath wasn't modern Connecticut anymore. The country below had a long-ago fairy tale look. There were rings in the grass that could be fairy rings, and caves in the mountains that might belong to gnomes. "Where am I?" she murmured. "In magic realms, of course," said the dragon, "and fairylands forlorn. That was what you wished for, wasn't it?" Frederica jumped, as well as she could in the dragon's grasp. She hadn't expected an answer. Then she took courage. If the dragon could talk, it was probably a superior type, perhaps even a friendly one. "How do wishes work, exactly?" she asked. "I've always wanted to know." "I don't know how they work for you," said the dragon, "but for us magic things, they're sort of doorways into the real world. We'll always get in if we can. Only there aren't many doors left. You must have found one of the last." "Oh," said Frederica. She thought for a minute. "But if you wanted to get into our world, why didn't you stay there?" "What's even better," said the dragon, "is to steal somebody out of your world into ours. The door works both ways. You've heard of fairies kidnapping children. It's the same with dragons, only different." Frederica cleared her throat. "Different in what way?" she asked cautiously. "Where are you taking me?" "To my lair, of course," said the dragon. "Why?" asked Frederica. The dragon appeared embarrassed. "For the usual purpose," it finally said. "Let's not talk about it." "You mean," said Frederica. "You know," said the dragon. "Oh," said Frederica in a small voice. There was a pause. "Why?" said Frederica. "Why are you so mean?" "Made that way," said the dragon, stretching its wings and causing a rather bumpy downdraft. "Have you ever thought," suggested Frederica, "of going on a vegetable diet? Trees might be tasty." The dragon shook its head. "Meat," it said, "is meat and drink to me. Of course I prefer a princess, but it's almost gone off the market lately. Damsel generally does as well. Or maiden. I've never tried small girl before, but it should be tender from the feel." And it gripped her tighter in its steely claws. Frederica tried to square her jaw. "I'm not," she said. "I'm tough as anything." And she made up her mind that she would try to be when the time came. But in spite of herself, her lip trembled and her spirits faltered and her heart sank. She wondered where Barnaby and the others were, and if pretty soon they would wish on the book and everything would come out right, or if her own wish had foiled the book and the magic had gone out of it and she would never see her family and friends or the real world again. And the dragon flew on. Meanwhile, a few miles back, so did Mrs. Funkhauser's house. And now Abby, at the window, was looking down on the same fairy tale landscape Frederica had observed a few minutes before. "What country is it, do you suppose?" she asked. "It can't be Oz, or it'd be all blue or yellow or red or purple or with emeralds." "I don't care for the look of it," said Mrs. Funkhauser, joining her at the window. "It's not a convenient neighborhood. There's no supermarket. I want to go home." "It's too late," said Barnaby, peering over their shoulders. "We're landing." The meadows and caves were suddenly rushing nearer, and a crowd of people could be seen below, staring upwards. John joined the watchers at the window. Susan and the round gentleman hung back, but a second later they went sliding along the floor. The combined weight of the others proved too much for the house's balance, and it slowly tilted, then tipped forward on its face. All the people fell on top of all the other people, and all the cats and kittens fell furrily and fussily and wallingly and scratchingly on top of them. The smallest kitten would have fallen right through the window, but Barnaby caught it in time. "Everybody back," he cried. "Distribute your weight or we'll crash." The others climbed up the slanty floor and placed themselves about the room till the house righted itself, and not a second too soon. There was a slight jar. Then all was still, but only for a moment. Following the jar came a roaring sound from without. "The dragon!" cried Abby in alarm. "No," said Barnaby, "it's people, and I think they're cheering." "Come on," said John, and he and Barnaby and Susan and Abby and the round gentleman made their way out of the house. Outside was a primrosy meadow with an old-fashioned looking village in the background. A crowd of peasants stood nearby. You could tell they were peasants by their peasant costumes. When they spoke peasant too. "Hooray! Hooray!" they said. "Be you come to kill the dragon and save us all?" "Why, yes," said Barnaby. "At least I hope so." The leader of the peasants came nearer and looked them over. "Well," he said, "leastways you be a change. Mostly we get princes. Mostly they come by horse, not house. Mostly they don't kill it, neither. Mostly they get it." "We won't," said Abby, hoping that she spoke the truth. "We brought our magic. We brought a wizard, too." "Magician, please," corrected the round gentleman. The first peasant looked at him. Then he looked beyond him. "You brought a witch, too, seems like." The 4 children followed his gaze. Mistress Funkhauser was just emerging from the house. So were the cats. But the cats' nerves had been rudely shocked by the tilting and tipping of the house, and they were still arching their backs and hissing. Some of the more maddened ones were climbing up Mrs. Funkhauser's dress and clawing at her hair. To say that as a group they presented a witch-like aspect would be putting it mildly. But Mrs. Funkhauser had heard the peasant's comment and resented it. "I," she told him, "am a respectable woman." The peasant nodded. "Good," he said. "You be a good witch, then. That's the best kind." "And now," said Barnaby, trying to sound more courageous than he felt, "lead us to your dragon." "It be right there," said the peasant. "Where?" said all the 4 children, jumping. "There, in the lair," said the peasant, pointing. The 4 children looked where he pointed. Beyond the house was a cave in the rock that they hadn't noticed before. A huffing sound of breathing came from within, and with each huff, a puff of purple smoke issued from the cavern's mouth. "He sounds awfully relaxed," said Susan. "Do you suppose he's eaten her already?" "No," said the first peasant. "He hain't. He feeds prompt at noon. 'Tis the custom." "Mornings he goes a-hunting," said a second peasant. "All among the local maidens. 'Tis a curse on us." "One a day he eats," said the third, "till the hero comes who'll kill the beast and rule the country. 'Tis the prophecy." "Not many maidens left by now," said a 4th peasant. "Seems like the race may die out before he does. 'Tis a problem." "Today's maiden makes no never-minds, though," said a 5th. "'Tis a stranger." "Nobody we know," agreed a 6th. "So that's all right," said the 7th and last peasant. Abby turned on the crowd of peasants indignantly. "It is not all right," she cried. "She is not a stranger. She's my little sister." And before Barnaby could stop her, she ran to the mouth of the cave. "Frederica!" she called wildly. Within the lair, Frederica heard her sister's voice and struggled in the dragon's grip. "Help!" she called back. "Hush now," said the dragon fussily, bending over her. "I never like it when folks scream. Spoils the taste going down and upsets my digestion later." "It does?" said Frederica, considerably encouraged, and she screamed again, even louder. "What a horrible sound! It must be eating her now," cried Susan, holding her ears. "No," said the first peasant, "it ain't. It feeds prompt at noon, and it feeds in public to scarify us." John looked at his watch. "It's 3 minutes to 12, he said. "We've got to do something fast," said Barnaby, turning to the round gentleman. "Oh dear," said the round gentleman. "Now the time has come. I don't believe I can." But a new voice was heard. "Shame on you, Mr. Oswaldo," it said. "The one time your pesky magic might be some use, don't you dare back out." Everyone turned in surprise. It was Mrs. Funkhauser. Apparently beneath her cross exterior she had hidden depths, and Frederica's cries had plumbed them. "You save that little girl," she said now, "or take a week's notice from Tuesday." "Well, I'll try," said the round gentleman, "but I doubt if I'll be much help." "Of course you will," said Susan encouragingly. "It stands to reason. The book wouldn't have brought you in otherwise. Or you either," she added, turning to Mrs. Funkhauser. Mrs. Funkhauser gave her a sharp look. "What book would that be?" Susan looked at Barnaby, and Barnaby gave a little nod. "Well, you see, we have this magic book," said Susan. "We're not sure yet just how it works," said John. "But it more or less began the whole thing," said Barnaby. "Let me see it," said Mrs. Funkhauser and the round gentleman, both speaking at once. Susan started to answer, but at that moment the steeple bells in the nearby village chimed noon, and the dragon emerged from its lair. and her words were drowned in a gasp. The children had had only a fleeting glimpse of the dragon before. Now, as it paraded up and down, displaying itself to the crowd, they saw its scaly scarlet sides and its hideous hungry jaws and its calamitous wreathing tail, and their hearts sank. "Don't just stand there! Do something!" Frederica called to her friends and relations from the dragon's grasp. Susan roused herself. "I will," she said, and she handed the book to the round gentleman. If you have understood about the book so far, you will know that for each person its power was different, because to each person it was the particular book that person had always longed to find. So while for the 5 children it was a magic story with them in it, for the round gentleman it was something else again. "Wishful Ways for Wizards," he read from the title page. "Why, this is wonderful! If I'd had this when I was in vaudeville, I needn't have retired in the first place." He turned the book's pages, sampling its contents. "How to turn day to night, how to tell chalk from cheese, 100 easy card tricks," he read. "Don't just skim, find the right place," called the captive Frederica. "To be sure," said the round gentleman shamefacedly. "I was forgetting. How to shrink a dragon. I'm sure I saw it here somewhere. Now where?" He leafed through the pages. "Oh, for pity's sake, let me," said Mrs. Funkhauser, taking the book from him. But of course, once in her housewifely hands, the book was a book of another color. "Helpful hints for homemakers," she read. "You take your skillet." The dragon, annoyed at this interruption, glared in her direction. Its gaze fell upon the book's title. "That isn't what it says," said the dragon. "It says Dreadful Deeds for Dragons, and I want it." It set Frederica down, keeping one claw on her for safekeeping, and stretched its other claw toward Mrs. Funkhauser. "Don't look at me, you nasty creature, don't," said Mrs. Funkhauser, snatching the book away. "Oh, you would you?" she added, as the dragon shot out an angry tongue of flame and a cloud of smoke. She consulted the book. "To put out an oven fire, use salt," she read. "That ought to do it. Fetch the salt, somebody." John ran into the house. "Stop interfering," said the dragon. "Do I have to eat you too?" "Oh, very well," and it opened its cavernous mouth. Then it hesitated. Mrs. Funkhauser looked as if she would be all gristle. Frederica undoubtedly would prove more toothsome. Should he save her till last or eat her first, as an appetizer? But he who hesitates is often lost. While the dragon was making up its mind, John came running out of the house with the salt box, and Mrs. Funkhauser shook it full in the dragon's face. There was a hissing sound, and the dragon's fire went out. I have heard it said that when a dragon's fire is put out, the dragon is rendered harmless. This is not true, because what I say is, what about the teeth? They would still be there, fire or no fire. In this case they were, and the dragon now showed all of them in a snarl of fury. At the same time, having its fire put out hurts a dragon's pride and lowers it in its own esteem. And since a dragon's belief in itself is part of a dragon's power, it is lowered in the public eye also. In this case by about 10 feet. It had been a 40-foot dragon to start with, so the change made quite a difference. The crowd cheered. The dragon trembled with rage and frustration and snapped at Mrs. Funkhauser, but it was not yet used to its new size, and its coordination was poor. So was its aim. "Bite me, would you?" said Mrs. Funkhauser, dodging it easily. She consulted the book again. "For bites, stings, etc., use household ammonia," she read. Barnaby did not wait to be asked, but went rushing into the house. "This is undignified," said the dragon. "Either get a sword and fight me properly, or withdraw from the combat." Mrs. Funkhauser did not deign to answer. Barnaby was back by now with the bottle from under the sink, and she took it from him and emptied it in the general direction of the dragon. The dragon sneezed and sputtered and coughed. Otherwise, it was not physically hurt. Its hurt went deeper. To be salted and ammoniaed by a domestic housewife is humiliating to a dragon, and makes it feel small. And when a dragon feels small, it is. Small, however, is a relative term, which means that it can mean many things. A small lion is bigger than a large flea. As for a small dragon, it is about the size of a large dog, and such now proved to be the case. The crowd cheered again. "This is monstrous," said the dragon, looking over its shoulder to see what size it was this time. You are breaking all the rules. St. George would have shown more consideration. My turn now, cried the round gentleman, dancing up and down with impatience and trying to catch a look at the book. To shrink a dragon. I know I saw it somewhere. But the next turn proved to be the cat's. When the dragon had first come out of its lair, all the cats and kittens had hidden behind Mrs. Funkhauser's skirts. Now, as the fumes from the ammonia reached their sensitive nostrils, they said, "Pig whiff," put back their ears, and peered out. What they saw seemed to be a large and unusually ugly dog at bay. As such, it was fair game for taunting. The cats had already had an extremely nerve-wracking morning, and they were in no gentle mood. They stalked forth, lashing their tails. You may have heard that an elephant is afraid of a mouse. With dragons and cats, it is very much the same. I think it has to do with claws and scales. The one might so easily scratch off the other. You may have noticed your own cat with your mother's nylon stockings. It is the same principle. The dragon saw the cats coming and shrank in fear. And once it started shrinking, it couldn't seem to stop. It shrank from the size of a large collie to the size of a medium-sized poodle. The cats stood around it in a circle, glaring and spitting. The dragon took one look at them and shrank in fear again. It shrank to the size of a small Pekingese, and the cats and kittens approached it and rattled their claws against its sides. "This is unendurable," said the dragon. "You tickle." It shrank until it was the size of a mouse, and the cats played with it, batting it to and fro. It shrank until it was the size of a small lizard or salamander or newt or eft, and its protesting voice died away in a faint squeak like the huffle of a snail in danger. Frederica stood up and stretched herself and looked down at the shrunken dragon. It was laughable to think of its eating her now. She might more easily have eaten it, but she would have disdained to. It was someone else who did. As the 5 children watched in horrified fascination, the smallest kitten pounced on the dragon and gobbled it down as easily as it might have swallowed a fly. Then it looked around with a surprised expression. Then it purred. "Is that real purr, do you suppose?" said Abby. "Or is it the dragon growling down there?" The kitten did not enlighten her. It went hurrying off to join its relations, who were trying to make friends with the field mice in a nearby cornfield, only the mice wouldn't. And now the crowd, which had been waiting at a safe distance, came up and surrounded the round gentleman and Mrs. Funkhauser, and more people appeared from the neighboring village, and they all cheered and let off fireworks. "3 cheers for the wonderful wizard Oswaldo, and may he reign over us and rule the land forever." "3 cheers for the respectable witch, too," cried all the people. The round gentleman smiled and bowed and waved his hat. As for Mrs. Funkhauser, she pretended to be fussed and embarrassed, but you could tell she was enjoying the applause just as much as he was. "The wizard didn't do a thing, really," muttered Abby to the others, under cover of the noise the people were making. "Mrs. Funkhauser and the cats did it all." "I guess that's the way with wizards," said Barnaby. "They let the witches do the work and then take the credit. It's the same way in stories." "Why, yes," said Frederica. "Even the Wizard of Oz was a humbug, remember?" Then she broke off. She had had an exciting thought, and the more she thought of the thought, the more exciting it was. "You know what?" she said. "This could be Oz, back in prehistory times, before the books tell about it. Nobody knows what it looked like then. Mr. Oswaldo could even be the real Wizard of Oz. This could be how he got there in the first place, and we're in it from the beginning." "But in the book, the real wizard tells Dorothy he came in a balloon," objected Abby. "Yes," Frederica admitted, "but in the book, the real wizard doesn't always tell the truth. Think back." Everybody thought back. Frederica went up to the nearest cheering peasant and tapped him on the shoulder. "Please," she said, "what country is this?" "We be called Dragonland," said the peasant, "up till now, but now all that be changed. Have to think up something new. Oswaldo land, maybe." "You see," said Frederica to the others, "it all works out. The name could have gotten shortened in the midst of time. Anyway, I'll always think it was Oz. I'll feel part of it from now on." "Or if it isn't," said Abby, "it's someplace just as interesting." And all agreed. "And now," said Barnaby, "I guess it's time to go." "How do we do that?" said John. "I'm not sure," said Barnaby. He went up to Mrs. Funkhauser and the round gentleman, and the other 4 followed. Are you really going to stay and rule the country? He asked. I must do as my public demands, said the round gentleman. They want me. Listen to them cheering. I suppose I'll have to stay too, said Mrs. Funkhauser. Somebody'll have to see that you're picked up and kept out of trouble. They've offered us a lovely palace, confided the wizard, if it was truly he. The one the princesses used to live in that the dragon ate. 30 rooms, said Mrs. Funkhauser grimly. Think of the dusting. Come, come, dear lady, said the round gentleman, who might be the wizard, in a rather lordly way. The maids of honor will attend to that. I, said Mrs. Funkhauser, have never trusted a maid yet and never will. Could we have our book now? Said Susan. We'll be taking it home with us. Are you sure you'll be all right here without it? Just let me take one more quick glance, said the round gentleman. He studied the first 3 or 4 pages briefly. There, that'll give me enough new tricks to stay in business for years. Susan offered Mrs. Funkhauser a look at the book, but she waved it away. I won't be needing it. Just use my common sense. All a matter of good housekeeping. What method of travel are you planning to use? The round gentleman asked the 5 children. That's just it, said Susan. We're not quite sure. Vanishing cream, said Mrs. Funkhauser promptly, without so much as a glance in the book's direction. There's some in my top bureau drawer. And Frederica ran to fetch it. Shall we let her? Whispered Abby. What if we just vanish and don't turn up anywhere? Trust the book, counseled Barnaby. It's done pretty well so far. And then Frederica returned with the jar of vanishing cream, and Mrs. Funkhauser rubbed a little on the foreheads of each. But Susan clasped the book tight and wished, too, just in case. You may wonder what vanishing feels like. The answer is that it feels like nothing at all. One second the 5 children were standing in a magic country that might or might not be Oz, watching a wizard, who might or might not be the wizard, give a demonstration of 100 easy card tricks while a crowd of peasants cheered. The next second they found themselves sitting on the front steps of Barnaby and Abby and Frederica's little white house in Connecticut. Back from the library already, said Barnaby and Abby and Frederica's mother, coming out the door on her way to try to sell someone a split-level colonial ranch house. You were quick. I don't feel quick, said Abby, when her mother had driven off. I feel as if I'd been away for years. Do you suppose that place really was Oz? If it was, said Frederica, I'm disappointed. I'd have thought we'd meet famous people, Dorothy and the Scarecrow and all those. Barnaby shook his head. I don't think that's how it works. I think it's more like this. Everybody has to go to Oz, or any other magic country, in his own way. The adventures that are written down in books already have been. If we tried to horn in on them, we'd just be tagging along. So we have to make our own adventures. It's as if there were different doors. That's what the dragon said Frederica dreamily. It did? Said Barnaby, interested. What else did it say? I forget, said Frederica, but it was interesting at the time. That dragon had a nice side in a way. I'm kind of sorry it's gone. Maybe it isn't, said John. Maybe its better self will merge with the kitten. Or maybe its worse self will, said Abby. Maybe the kitten will grow up with man-eating tendencies. They'll have to watch over it and curb it and mold its infant mind. Only we'll never know whether they did or not, or what happened, sighed Susan. There was a silence. Anyway, we're started now, said Barnaby. It's your turn tomorrow. Susan shook her head. Tomorrow's Sunday. What of it, said Frederica. It's summer. There's no Sunday school. Even so, said Susan, magic's not a Sunday thing. Not that it's sinful or anything, I don't mean, but they just wouldn't mix. How'll we get through a whole day, said Abby. The thought might be father to the wish. Better shut the book up somewhere safe, said Barnaby. I'm going to, said Susan. Without reading the chapter now it's finished? Frederica wanted to know. Dwell in the dead past if you want to, Barnaby told her. I know what it says. I'd kind of like to look, said John, and he took the book from Susan and began to read. It's got illustrations, reported Frederica, hanging over his shoulder. Is that what I look like? That isn't what I look like. And then the good humor man came driving along the road, ringing his bell, and everyone ran to catch up with him, and magic was forgotten in the cooling joy of sheer sherbet. But first Susan ran across the street to her own house and put the book away carefully in her top bureau drawer. And later that day, just before supper, without saying anything to the others, she took a walk along Lower Weed Street. As she rounded the familiar bend, she wondered whether she would see a mere hole in the ground where Mrs. Funkhauser's house had been. But to her surprise, the house was still there, the same as always. The sign by the driveway was still there too. But when Susan came nearer, she saw that the sign didn't say, "Slow, cats, etc." anymore. The sign said, "For sale." And when she went up close to the house and peered in through its windows, she saw that every stick of furniture inside was gone. It was nice to know that whatever the name of the magic kingdom where Mrs. Funkhauser now reigned, she apparently had her salt and her ammonia and other useful supplies for a respectable witch with her. She had probably moved her possessions to the palace, thought Susan, and then probably she hadn't wanted the house there to remind her of her humble origins, so she had probably rubbed vanishing cream on it too. And maybe some of the magic from the book had gotten into the vanishing cream, so that it still worked. Or maybe Mrs. Funkhauser, unlike the late dragon, had started believing in her own power so much that she was beginning to be a real witch now, though Susan was sure that she would always be a respectable one. While she was thinking these thoughts, a woman had come out on her porch next door and was regarding her curiously. "If you're looking for Mrs. Funkhauser and Mr. Oswaldo," said the woman, "they've moved, all of a sudden as ever was. And they do say," she went on, "that he's gone back into vaudeville." Susan thought of the round gentleman as she had last seen him at a Mrs. Funkhauser and her housewifely witchcraft. "Yes," she said slowly. "Yes, I guess you might say they both have, in a way." And she started walking home.